Hi, my name is Andrew Brown and I'm a senior groom TD currently working at Industrial Light and Magic here in London. I've been using Houdini for grooming in a professional environment now for a few years, and in the latest version of Houdini, which is version 19, Side Effects have rewritten the Guide Groom SOP, which is the primary tool that most users go to when creating and sculpting guides. This video attempts to point out some of the features in previous versions of Houdini that are missing in this current version. Hopefully, Side Effects will get around to adding some of this functionality back because it is greatly missed. For this demo, I'm first going to show you my setup in Houdini 18.5. I'm using a custom radial menu that has 4 simple brushes: plant guides, screen, cut, and extend. This is my main method of switching between tools. I'm just going to create a guide here with a default length of 0.1 and a segment count of 8. And I'm going to leave the points visible for clarity here as I switch to the screen brush. Now I'm going to turn constraint length off so that we can shrink or grow this guide. And as I sculpt, you can see what's happening. The curve is maintaining an equal distance between each segment, allowing for a very smooth and easy to control curve. It's very intuitive and it's almost elastic in nature. The key in allowing this behavior is the option Resample All Affected Curves. Now, if you turn this off, what happens is the points are allowed to move independently without maintaining any constant distance between each other. What is nice is that if you turn this option back on, the curve will be resampled while trying to maintain the same shape. This operation happens per curve, so if you place multiple curves and some have Resample All Affected Curves turned on, and for some you sculpt while having it turned off, it will only affect the ones that you have selected. This is a very powerful workflow that is no longer present. And with that, let's have a look at the current workflow in Houdini 19. So in version 19, if I place a guide, having the mode set to single, I can select it and switch to the sculpt brush, which is the equivalent of the screen brush. Constraint length is still an option, so I will turn it off to mimic what we did in the last demo. However, Resample All Affected Curves is no longer available. And as you can see here, as I sculpt along the curve, all the points move along with it without maintaining an equal distance between each other, which can be quite difficult to control. There is a hotkey that can help us. On the left, you can see Shift D will redistribute the points. And while that's great, it means that the user will have to bounce between sculpting and then resampling. This means more clicks and hotkey presses for essentially performing the same operation and getting the same result. The only time I feel when sculpting feels intuitive is when constraint length is turned on, but obviously that can be somewhat limiting. In Houdini 18.5 and below, sculpting guides with resampling turns on just behaves how one would expect. And if you needed absolute point control without any other points being affected, you could turn it off. Okay, so before we go, let's have a quick look at the cut brush. We're back in Houdini 18.5, and as you can see, I'm able to select a guide and cut them at the borders of the brush. It's a very useful and interactive implementation. So now let's take a look and see how this has changed in Houdini 19. So in the new Guide Groom SOP, this mode has been removed. It's been replaced with an Adjust Length mode. And the values that I have here provide no real result. So I began to search for the best way to tackle this problem. And after discussing with other users and experimenting with various settings, this is the closest that I'm able to mimic the cut brush. However, one, this is not as accurate as the 18.5 implementation. It might be hard to see, but the user now has to click multiple times to get the guide to cut at the borders of the brush. Again, multiple clicks to achieve the same result in a previous version is never a desired result. And two, the settings that you now see for the adjust length will carry over when I switch to the sculpt brush or any other brush that share any common parameters. For example, softness is a common parameter that is shared between many brushes, and now I will need to constantly change this value if I'm to switch between cutting guides and sculpting them, because the softness value of 0 in sculpt mode makes adjusting guides very difficult. In closing, the new guide groom SOP in Houdini 19 is a welcome amendment, and I understand the reasoning by side effects to remove the previous one. The recache method rarely worked, even in the most simplest scenarios, and now to have the core no longer be a digital asset and something that is optimized to now work with a lot more primitives, it will be a lot more powerful to use. I hope highlighting these comparisons provide constructive discussion topics and help aid in the development of the new guide groom SOP.